the amount of shootings we're having, it's at 250 just this year. And, when I was a kid, prepping for an active shooter on campus was not even something that we ever considered or thought about. And now kids are, it seems like it seems like all schools are having drills, having consideration for if there's an active shooter on their campus. I mean, that's just so beyond.
So wrong.
It's just so beyond reasonable. I want to ask you, first of all, why do you think all these mass shootings are happening to begin with?
To me, it's such a multifaceted problem from top to bottom. And so the things that we're focused on right now are in some ways the most immediate problems, which is our political rhetoric and climate has demonized and vilified people on the other side, then makes it seem like somehow violence might be appropriate in some circumstance. Certainly the fact that we have so many guns in this country, we're at almost 400 million firearms, almost one for every man, woman, and child. Now, that gun ownership is concentrated in the hands of a relatively small number of Americans. One of the stats I saw was that 3% of Americans own 50% of the guns.
Wow.
So that's like a lot of guns per person in that 3%. But 3% in a country our size is still 10 million Americans. You have the fact that the NRA is making it impossible to pass any reasonable gun safety laws, even though the vast majority of Americans support background checks and red flag laws and obvious safety measures. And then the deeper problems are around this loss of any kind of sense of purpose or like the direction, where unfortunately it makes people more subject to hateful ideologies that can spread much more virulently on the internet now than they could have even 12, 15 years ago.
They're finding communities that reinforce their beliefs.
Yeah, this internet pioneer named Jaron Lanier pointed out that negative ideas and sentiments spread much more powerfully on the internet than positive ones. And if you think about your own experience in social media, it's kind of true. It's like the toxic things like just sort of take on a life of their own. And so that's helping fuel this set of problems. So that there are problems up and down, and we have to try and attack each one in turn. But unfortunately, it's going to be with us for a long time because, again, we're talking about a country with 300 million plus firearms.
Yeah.
It's dark. I mean, even if we passed some of these gun safety laws, which we 100% should and will, we need to have a perpetual buyback in effect, in my opinion, where we just say, look, anytime you want to sell your gun, like we'll buy it off you like that because we need to try and get the supply down over time.
Interesting. Why are people feeling so purposeless, so nihilistic? I mean, really, that's what these people are, is just such a dark, nihilistic... it always ends with them killing themselves. They want to kill themselves. They want to kill other people. What is that a symptom of in terms of, like, mentally, where that comes from?
I think, unfortunately, we're in like a period of just vast disillusionment in our society, where if you came of age in another era, they would say, hey, here are the things that are important, and if you do this, then it's going to work out for you in this way and that way. And then now we just don't believe any of it.
Right.
Now you say, hey, you go to college, part of you is like, well, you're just going to load me up with debt. I'm going to graduate and not going to have the job. And the adults will be like, oh, you should still do this. Whereas before, maybe that promise actually was real. Maybe if you went to college, then things would work out in very positive ways. So people look around and say, I don't believe in our institutions. I don't believe in what my future holds. And then you become subject to all sorts of very terrible and sinister ideas and ideologies.
I can speak for myself as a college graduate that without, the very unlikely chance of me succeeding as an entertainer, before that I was a waiter. I had no prospect of finding a serious job. I lived in Israel for 5 years with Hila, and I was able to find a job there because I was qualified as a English speaker. But I think the prospects are bleak for a lot of people. There's just not opportunities out there.
Yeah, the numbers bear it out too. Our economy has stopped producing quality jobs with benefits for years and years, where 94% of the new jobs that are getting created are temp, gig, or contractor jobs that often don't have secure benefits. And so if that's what you're producing in your economy, then people rightfully feel like their future is often quite bleak.
So let's say we get the freedom dividend going, and we're giving everyone $1,000 a month.
Would you like to explain that maybe a little more in case anyone doesn't know?
Yeah, I should get into that, but I'll finish this thought and we'll get into it. But like, if we're giving people $1,000 a month, is that gonna solve that issue? Even, you know, like, and if we keep going into the future, 50 years, 100 years, I mean, how many jobs are left, right?
Well, this is the fundamental reinvention that's in many ways at the heart of my campaign. So right now, our economy revolves around these ideas of capital efficiency, where the market says, you know, if you're an accountant, you're worth $75,000. If you're a truck driver, you're worth $46,000. And what I'm saying right now is, look, technology is going to come that's going to do the job of the accountant and the truck driver. And then what is their new market worth going to be? Not what it was, you know, like it's sort of unclear what the new value is. So we're in the midst of the greatest economic transformation in human history. And we need to start finding new pursuits and jobs and ways to value our own time. And one of the examples I use that my wife is at home with our two boys, one of whom has autism, and the market values her work at zero. And there are millions of women around the country in the same boat where we're like, your time's worth zero. And we all know that the work she's doing is some of the hardest and most important work that anyone does. Yeah, you know, you have a 2-month-old. You're like, holy crap, this is the hardest job there to do.
That's the issue with capitalism, though, right? Because they don't produce like tangible, I guess tangible. They don't right produce to the economy in a touchable way, right? It's an intangible asset.
And so in a way, we have to transform what we think of as tangible value. So if you make another human being stronger and healthier, that's good. Immensely valuable.
Yeah.
It's just right now our economic statistics don't value that appropriately.
Or investing in and having a happy, healthy family is good for society.
Yes. And so this is the great opportunity in an age where technology is going to end up assuming more and more work, is that we have to rethink and broaden what we think of as work. And then we have to come up with different and better and more human ways of valuing our own time. Because if we play out the capital efficiency race, we lose like at an epic level. You know, I joke, but it's true. I was an unhappy corporate attorney for 5 whole months, and I can guarantee you can automate that job away. You know what I mean? like this isn't just like the warehouse shelver. Like this is the lawyers, the accountants, the radiologists. Like it just goes on the list. So we have to take this chance to evolve and start thinking more deeply about, okay, what is the work we want to do? What is valuable in our lives? How do we reward and incentivize the work that we need more of for ourselves? And so I have some big ideas on this. The $1,000 a month is not the solution. It's a foundation. It's like the floor on which you can start building. But it gives us a chance. It gets the boot off of people's throats, and it gives us a chance to start measuring our economic progress in things that would actually matter to us, like our health and well-being, our mental health and freedom from substance abuse, how our kids are doing, how clean our air and water is, like whether we enjoy the work we're doing, things that might actually get us excited.
One of the jokes that currently seem like a privilege, you know, to someone who's just busy surviving.
Yes. But one of the jokes I tell is how many people get excited about GDP when they wake up in the morning. They're like, oh, I'm going to make a big contribution to GDP. So if you were to say, how many of you get excited if you were to make your community stronger, mentally healthier? People would be like, oh, that would be tremendous. It's just most people don't have the opportunity to do that kind of work. So this is the big chance we have, and we have to take it, because if we stay on this road too long, GDP and capital efficiency are going to send us flying off a cliff. And one of the things I say to people is like, look, self-driving trucks will be great for GDP. You're going to save tens of billions of dollars. It's going to be terrible for the 3.5 million truck drivers and the 7 million Americans who work in truck stops, motels, and diners around the country waiting for the truckers to get out and have a meal. So you guys run a business, and so you have measurements you look at all the time. It's around like how engaged viewers are, like how many people are clicking on things. We need the right measurements for our society. we made up GDP almost 100 years ago. And even the inventor said this is a terrible measurement of national well-being and we should never use it as that.
Mm-hmm.
That was 100 years ago.
Right.
And so here we are just still following it 100 years later, being like, oh, GDP is going to tell us how we're doing. We need to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have an idea for what that new metric might look like? I mean, what is it?
Yes, I do. So I call it the American scorecard, and it keeps GDP as one data point, but it integrates health and life expectancy, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, childhood education and success rates, environmental quality. And we have numbers for these things. And so we can integrate them into our economic measurements. And then at the State of the Union every year as president, I will actually present the scorecard and say, as an example, 8 Americans are dying of drug overdoses every hour. That's terrible and unconscionable. So we're going to get that down by 50% over the next few years. And here's how we're going to do it. And then if individuals or companies or organizations put resources to work to move society in that direction, then they actually get rewarded economically. Because right now the problem is that all the economic rewards cut in this direction, and then all of the helping people rewards cut the other direction.
Right.
So what would an incentive look like for, let's say, Amazon to, how could Amazon contribute, for example, to an issue like that?
Well, the first thing we do is we take our fair share of every Amazon sale and distribute it to people. And that's not something Amazon has a choice about. It's just like, hey, guess what? This is the new way.
Right.
And then and I will say I'm supported by hundreds of techies who are down with this plan because they're not all bad. They're just like, look, I'm doing my job, and like I get that there are these problems. So that's number one. But go ahead.
The VAT that you put on Amazon, theoretically, what percentage are we talking about of their revenue?
Well, my proposal is a 10% VAT, which is half the European level.
Oh, wow. Sorry, go ahead. I never got that stat. I'm just curious. So essentially 10% of all the sales Amazon's making becomes a tax to the government.
Yeah. And then
which is still pretty low
in the scheme, right?
If you're looking at 10%.
Well, yeah.
I'd love to pay 10%. I'd be rich as hell if I only paid 10%.
Yes. So that's the first move is you say, look, guess what? American people now get a slice. It'll help you too. Everyone's happy. And I have hundreds of techies who are behind me and think that this is the best path forward.
You think Jeff Bezos will be down with that, or they'll lobby against it?
Well, I know that Jeff Bezos knows that his number one obstacle now is the U.S. government. And so he has to figure out how to manage that. It is no mystery. He bought the Washington Post. He moved Amazon's HQ2 mostly to the D.C. area. He bought this giant home there. He gets it. He's like, okay, the number one thing that could stand in my way of getting to do whatever I want is the federal government waking up. And so let me try and pat it back to sleep.
It's almost unimaginable that one human being could be so powerful, but also so hell-bent on singularly affecting the economy for his own benefit. How could you, as one human, it's almost inconceivable, isn't it, to get inside his head and to think, just to keep gathering and gaining for oneself at the benefit of an entire country. He must not see it that way, surely.
Oh, he doesn't see it that way. He's spending billions on rockets to Mars, and for him, he thinks the wealth is much better in my hands than in the government's hands because I'm going to advance the species. I'm going to get us to Mars. What the hell would the government do with this money? The government would just do something stupid with it. So that's one perspective. It's his perspective. We can't take that perspective all the way to the bank if we're the American people. And then it's not just Jeff. It's like, the Jeff of industry, YZ.
There's a lot of Jeffs. Yeah.
There are a lot of Jeffs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the number one big move is we say, look, we get a slice, and that's going to make society stronger and healthier. But number two, if they do something, because right now big companies, they do something for good PR, and then they say to people, look, it was good PR. So what we say to them is, hey, Amazon, if you can demonstrate that you're making children in this community stronger, or improving the mental health of this group of people, or helping these ex-convicts reintegrate into society, or cleaning up the environment, and we can document that, then we can give you a tax credit for that. And so
How
that's
do you give someone a tax credit who's paying zero?
Well, I know in this case, well, obviously we'd get them off the zero tax bracket. And they can carry over the tax credit. I mean, there are different ways to create carrots and sticks for these companies. The trick right now, though, is to try and align their well-being with ours, because right now their bottom line is like goal 1, 2, and 3, and then they're paying zero tax is also part of their job. One of the things I say is, look, it's Amazon's job to try and pay as little in taxes as possible. It's our job to make it make it impossible for them to pay zero in taxes over and over again.
The game is rigged right now. They don't have a strong competitor.
They don't have a strong competitor.
Yeah. We were talking about gun control. We got off that really, really quickly somehow. But I did want to ask you this to circle back to that. It's a complicated issue. You say that most Americans want common sense gun laws. It does seem like a party issue where most conservatives, there's kind of this echo chamber of people who are saying, don't restrict us. The government wants to take all of our guns. I mean, there's propaganda. But how do you get around the Second Amendment? Like, the wording of it specifically says, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Do you intended that the authors of that meant for there to be no restrictions on it at all? Because it does say shall not be infringed. So how do you interpret that line?
Well, to me, you have to think of the intent at the time. And at that moment, they could not foresee automatic weapons that could kill dozens of Americans in very, very short periods of time. For them, bear arms meant, a single shot, musket or rifle, to make sure that, you can't be completely marginalized in your own town or in your own country. So I'm for adhering to the Second Amendment in the sense that there are many, many law-abiding, gun-owning Americans, and they have that right, and that right's going to continue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's strong propaganda, because what you always see is people basically saying they want to take all of our guns away.
Yeah, that is the argument, and that to me is because if you look at the numbers, 80 to 90% of Americans on both sides of the aisle agree that we should have background checks for gun owners. They agree that we should not have people who are criminally violent or have some other red flag associated with their record be allowed to buy guns. Yeah. So the vast majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle, but you're right that there's a passionate subgroup. And it goes back to what I said before, 3% of Americans own 50% of guns.
Right.
I have a feeling that's a very passionate 3%.
What I wonder, too, is when this was written, were citizens allowed to own cannons or other, weaponry of more massive destruction? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying.
And I don't know the answer to that.
And today, too, I mean, this is morphed in a particular way, because if the purpose is to defend yourself against government incursion, I mean, at this point, like, our government owns things bigger than cannons.
Well, and any AK-47 or whatever you've got, I mean, the government, if they want, that's not going to make a difference.
Yeah. And so this is like to me, something that has strayed from the original intent of the framers.
Yeah. Okay.
And one joke that Joe Rogan said is that if the writers of the Constitution woke up today, they'd be shocked that we didn't write any new shit.
Right.
Like the Constitution actually had ways to be sort of, modified or
amended, ratified,
or amended. Yeah, like they're different things.
I mean, the whole point was that it was meant to be a living document.
It's meant to be, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the dangers right now in the U.S. is that we have lost confidence in our government. We also lost confidence in our government to update its own operating system.
Right.
Where one of the things I point out is, how the heck are we still hyperventilating about Supreme Court justices who are 80-something years old and be like, oh my gosh, if they get sick, like, it's going to be terrible. It's like, why do we have lifetime appointments for Supreme Court justices?
Right.
Because when they started that back in the day, one, people did not live as long as they did now. So you didn't have 86-year-old.
Yeah.
And number two, Supreme Court justices just stepped down for any of a number of reasons. They didn't just stay there until they died.
It wasn't like some political, like, long game.
No.
They gracefully stepped down.
Yeah, they would step down.
Yeah.
And so we just need to try and solve the problems of this time with the tools we have in this time.
Mm.
And the tools we have are much more advanced in some ways, like around our economic measurements. Like we actually have measurements that we can utilize that are much more nuanced and powerful than GDP, as an example.